So, well, thanks for everyone who's come along today. I appreciate your time. So, our webinar today is about technology strategy, and we're going to be talking about how can long-term thinking survive the short-term pressures within IT and sustainability targets. The webinar is run by the Sustainability Professionals Partnership. We're basically a small supportive community, and we're really just here to challenge business thinking and help organisations foster a more sustainable, dynamic and profitable future, as it says on there. So today there's three main speakers within the meeting today. So Darren, Martin, and myself. Darren, do you want to do a first quick introduction?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So my name's Darren Hilton. I'm an executive coach and facilitator working with a whole variety of organisations. I'm actually from the tech sector, 20 years in the tech sector, so it's very familiar to me. But what I tend to do now for the last 9 years is work with leaders in tech organisations, well, a whole range of organisations, but often tech organisations, to help them lead better, manage their teams, improve communication, and meet or achieve the outcomes they're looking to achieve with their organisations. And I think the thing that's become clear to me is that, in terms of sustainability, often the mindset of the leaders, the leadership teams, is crucial to actually making any progress in organizations. And so a lot of the work I do is kind of researching that and getting a sense of what needs to change for the way people think in organizations, so that we actually start to make some significant progress towards the sustainability targets that they have and we want them to have in this world.
Fantastic. Thank you, Darren. Martin, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah. Hi all, I'm Martin. So I also have a background in the technology sector, and recently I've been trying to sort of pivot my career towards a more sustainable path, and to focus on figuring out how we can reduce the impact of technology on the planet, particularly on IT on the planet. I'm a regional director at Freeman Clarke, so we provide senior technology leaders, CIOs and CTOs for mid-sized companies all around the UK, and I look after the Southwest.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin. And then myself, I'm Peter Ray. I'm the managing consultant of ITA. I was previously within the tech reseller industry, so as an MD in a company based in the south of the UK as a systems integrator. And then I've moved into consultancy services, which is where I'm now. And we specialise in the intersection of technology and sustainability. So we sit very firmly within that space. So the only sustainability area that we focus on is the tech sector, just to make sure that we have a specialism in that. So brilliant. Okay, so as what we're going to be covering today is we've got three different basic connected parts here. So the first part is from Martin. So Martin's going to be talking about AI and sustainability. Darren will then go through the sustainability begins with leadership, and then last will be myself. So I'm going to be going through from crisis to clarity. But we'll go through each of those sections one by one. So first up is Martin. So
thank you,
Martin,
Peter.
over to you, if that's okay.
Yep, thanks very much. So if you saw our last webinar, I focused a little bit on how people should think about AI, because I think AI is one of obviously is one of the largest emerging trends in technology at the moment, and has a huge impact on sustainability. So this time I'm looking a little more deeply at the energy consumption of AI. So this slide and the next one are just a little recap. So as everyone knows, AI is everywhere. It's super ubiquitous now. It can do lots of different things. Businesses are really working hard to implement AI and to try to get benefits to their bottom line effectively by doing that. And Peter, if you just scroll to the next slide, there's a couple of sort of sound bites or bits of information on there. I won't go through all this in detail, but essentially the sobering thing about AI is the amount of energy it consumes, both in the training and also in the inference for AI. So when you ask a model a question, that's inference, and it's often very, very costly, especially with agents and with things like deep research, where you can ask a simple question and it might take 20 minutes to come back with an answer, and that's a huge amount of compute that you've triggered. Sometimes through a trivial, it's very tempting to ask all kinds of trivial questions, and so it drives massive energy consumption for perhaps not always the most beneficial output. And so I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I'm helping companies to implement AI, and I'm trying to bring in a focus on energy consumption as part of how they decide how to do AI. So on the next slide, Peter, while I was thinking about this during the summer, I came across the Economist ran a couple of articles that caught my eye, and the first one was from Chris Wright, who's the US Secretary of Energy, and he wrote a by invitation piece in the Economist where he essentially said that the carbon impact and the climate impact of economic progress was actually a bit of a sideshow and a red herring, and really what we need to focus on is continuing to grow our economies. And if that takes hydrocarbons, as he called them, fossil fuels, then we should be happy with that. And if alongside that, if we can improve the climate, then great. But that's not the focus. And really, any country that is attempting to, where the government is attempting to maximize the use of renewable energy, any country doing that is probably going to destroy their economy. He was pretty strong-worded, but it's going to certainly harm their economy. And I found that very depressed. Obviously, among this audience, very depressing perspective, because it suggests that there's really such an influential country putting out such an important message. Really means that we're going to set back the journey towards decarbonisation of renewables by a long way. They had an alternative perspective in the same issue by Vinod Khosla, who's a billionaire venture capitalist, and he is the co-founder of Sun Microsystems, for example. So rich and influential guy. And his perspective was slightly better, but actually also somewhat depressing. So he said, renewables, sure, and new tech to solve energy problems, sure, we should focus on that, but really only if there's a clear return on investment. And so again, only if that really hits our bottom line in a positive way as businesses. And if not, then we should carry on using fossil fuels, is the implication. And so whilst slightly different view, essentially the same message. And so, so I had a slightly depressing couple of days in July reading those two things. But then a couple of days later, there was a speech by Antonio Guterres, who's the UN Secretary General, and he, slightly in contrast to what the UN has been saying over the last maybe decade or so, that I think the messaging over the last decade has been renewables are good, let's do them, but they're not there yet. We still will need fossil fuels to sustain ourselves. What he said this time around in July was, actually renewables are now cheaper than fossil fuels. And because we know fossil fuels are going to cause so much harm to the planet, we should definitely be investing in the use of renewables as much as we can, because there's both an environmental positive impact, but also a bottom line positive impact. So I kind of see these guys as on a continuum. On the far left of the continuum, the most extreme, you've got Chris Wright, who's very much suggesting that we need to just use fossil fuels and forget about the climate. Vinod is somewhere in the middle, and Antonio Guterres is now, further on the far right, where you've actually got, someone influential in the world saying use renewable energy because it's actually cheaper as well as better for the planet. Peter, if you move on to the next slide. That kind of informs my thinking. As I think about helping companies to implement AI, I have this kind of this constant dilemma between the return on investment for the company. So lots of people do AI projects because they think they're going to get a positive ROI, return on investment, and actually lots of times they don't, because either it's been a failed experiment or because the expected benefits just aren't quite there yet. And it's actually surprisingly difficult to get an AI project that really genuinely changes how a company works and reduces cost. obviously it's lots of people are doing it, but it's not the easiest thing to do. And then trying to balance that, as well as that being difficult, then to try and balance that against the climate impact makes it even harder. But I think it's possible. And so, Peter, on the next slide, I have started to form up a 2x2 matrix. So I used to be in consulting, so every good consultant has 2x2 matrix. So on the left hand, the sort of vertical axis, I've got climate impact from low to high, and on the horizontal, the business impact from negative to positive. And so I won't have time to go through every quadrant on here, but essentially, if you can try and calculate the climate impact of your AI project, which you can do somewhat informally by working out how many queries you're actually going to send to an AI model versus how much training are you going to do, and kind of getting a sense of how expensive that is in terms of energy cost. Or you can do more formally, so people are producing calculators. I've linked to an example here that you could go and pursue. So Deloitte's produced a calculator that you can enter some basic data into. It gets fairly technical, but it gives you an idea of how climate costly your AI project is going to be. And in broad terms, on this 2x2, you don't want to be anywhere on the left-hand side because that actually has negative business impact. So just in general common sense for AI, people get very enthusiastic and excited about doing AI, but it might, there might not always be a payback at the end. So really thinking through whether there's going to be a payback at the end for the business, for the bottom line is important. Anything on the left-hand side tending negative, don't do anyway. But then on the right-hand side, where there's positive business impact, then you've got two real sort of key areas. So on the bottom right, that's a great place to be, the sweet spot. So that is where your climate impact is pretty low, but your business impact is pretty high. So do all projects you can in that quadrant if possible. But then the real, the challenge comes when there's great ROI, the business can really benefit from doing this AI project, but the climate impact is much higher. And there, you are in a tough situation. So then you really do have that weighing scales of, do I care about the planet and climate more than I care about business ROI? And often, as the technology leader, you're not necessarily responsible for that kind of decision, that kind of balancing act. So you have to try to present a decision in such a way that creates enough balance to be able to trade the two off, but without necessarily having all the control of where the money is spent. So I think I find this model helpful because I try and steer people towards the bottom right quadrant as much as possible. But in the top right, there is a kind of, Peter, if you just move to the next slide. There are some options. So actually, one of the key things I now consider, as I've looked into this, OpenAI really doesn't publish any information about their carbon footprint, and certainly make no commitments on using renewable energy or any other kind of energy. And so one thing you can do in that tough spot quadrant is really to just avoid using OpenAI and ChatGPT. If you can't, if you want to sort of not just move away from something, but move towards something, then actually considering big cloud like AWS and Azure is worth it, because they both claim to be using 100% renewable energy to power their data centers now. And I think there's a little bit of clever mathematics going on there. I think they are using some fossil fuels at some times, but the fact that they're publicly being on that journey and making a commitment even to carbon neutrality in a few years' time as well is, I think, worth considering. And you can use AI models in both of those clouds effectively. Or alternatively, you can use more sort of niche cloud providers. So NextGen and an even smaller provider called pSoup both have sustainable cloud offerings that would let you host AI models. The challenge being that neither of those have AI models. You can just, the turnkey, you would have to build your own thing and host it in the cloud. But I think we'll see more solutions coming that will enable people to really focus on doing AI in those niche cloud and more sustainable clouds as well soon. So that's how I'm thinking about AI and energy currently, and hopefully that's been an interesting thesis. I'd welcome some thoughts and debate.
Brilliant, thanks, Martin. Appreciate that. Darren, I know you had a question, but were there any questions coming from anywhere else that you want to go through as well?
No, there's no questions in the chat at the moment. But I mean, but my question, I mean, I'm in that over 50 generation where I'm probably using ChatGPT all the time, you know, and that's the only AI sort of application I'm using. And so I was just wondering if I was to look at an alternative, what might I consider? You know, if you know Azure and AWS is overtly renewable, what might be available?
I think it's a really good question, and it is really tricky, especially as the kind of the consumer or end user, because these models have taken so much investment and so much focus and capital from large businesses. It's very hard for a niche player to come in and offer a model that's as strong as the ChatGPT or one of its competitors. But one thing that strikes me is that Copilot is largely based on the OpenAI models, and that is running in Microsoft infrastructure. So given that Azure claims to be 100% using 100% renewable energy, logically it would follow that Copilot would be a more sustainable choice than ChatGPT, and you would get similar levels of computing horsepower. I need to check into that a little bit more, but I think that's probably a good way to lean.
Thanks, Martin.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, okay, great. So next up, Darren, floor's yours.
I've just noticed a question from David. So I don't know, should we cover that at the end? Do you want to do that?
Well,
I think
do it.
Let's move on. I think it'd be great to move forward, and then it'd be great to pick it up at the end.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Okay, so thanks, Peter and Martin. So I come at this from a slightly different perspective to Martin. So I'm thinking about, as humans, how are we responding to the situation, and as IT leaders, how are we responding? I can remember I've been the MD of a couple of businesses, tech businesses, an ISP, and an application development business, and I do recognise the pressures. And if you just go to the first slide, Peter, there are the inevitable pressures of, well, increasingly pressure from regulators, customers, employees, the community to do more sustainable work and to be more sustainable in the way that we do our work. And at the same time, you've got the financial cycles, the complex supply chains, the market volatility that are constantly driving our sort of attention, if you like. And so I just guess, having been in that seat, I recognise it isn't just a technical challenge to fix. This is also a leadership challenge, because the way you set the direction for your team, organisation, is going to impact how you affect the sustainability of your organisation, or the sustainable impact that it has. And I go back to a quote that I sort of shared in the last session, which I think is still very relevant, from Gus Speth, who's an American environmental lawyer who on Radio 4 in 2013, so 12 years ago, said he used to think that actually the biggest problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change, and he thought 30 years of good science would actually address those issues. But what he realized is that actually the biggest problems are us, our selfishness, greed, apathy towards the problem. Although I think that's shifting, or has shifted in the last 12 years, it's still a transformation that I think we're going through. And this is what I'd like to focus on today, which is kind of taking that quote and saying, well, so what does that mean in real terms? What can I do as a leader? So I'd like to just, if you move to the next slide, Peter, just share what's out there at the moment that's helping to steer us in the right direction. And so where I get led to is the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, at the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And within those, what was developed was their inner development goals, which were development goals that based on a huge amount of research, the UN is saying, if we focus some attention on these as humans, then we are far more likely to start to move in the right direction in terms of how we develop systems, how we organize ourselves to respond to the climate crisis. And just to give you a brief overview, there are five to focus on, with summary titles and then subtitles underneath them. And just to give you a feel for how they may relate to the topic at hand, how you balance long-term thinking with short-term pressures. Your being is the first one. And what does that really mean? In many ways, it's about your inner compass. It's about your clarity about your values and how that then orientates your decisions. So, for example, if you don't care about the climate, if you think it's a hoax, like some people do, then you're unlikely to make decisions that are going to be relevant and linked to more sustainable working. You know, how you think about this thing, how you think about the challenge we face is so fundamental. And the challenge for us as leaders is holding the paradox. You know, holding the paradox of short-term systems that we're involved with, a capitalist system, if you like, that drives behavior, and the fact that we have to think long-term in terms of how we survive this. You know, that's a paradox. And how do we hold that as humans? It can be tricky. And we have to think about, we have to hold that complexity. You know, how we relate, you know, recognizing that we are all interdependent. And therefore, what we do alone isn't going to cut it. You know, we're going to have to work together to work our way through and navigate these tricky times. And that requires collaboration, which is the fourth one. You know, working collectively to come up with solutions that means that we can navigate the tricky times we have. And the fifth one is acting. You know, in order to drive change, we have to act. And so, you know, that requires people to step up in the right way. And what I suggested in the last session that we had, that's available on the BTS, is that actually you can measure that using something that I use called the leadership circle profile. You can measure how you're responding to situations and how you stack up against the inner development goals of the UN. So there's a useful sort of framework that we can use to guide us in how we respond to this situation. And you can also measure how you're responding to the situation. So that's quite helpful. But in this session, what I'd like to do is just sort of dive a bit deeper and say, okay, if they're what the UN suggests we should be doing, and I can actually measure how I'm responding to the situation with the tool that you suggest, what actually does it mean? What do I need to do? What leadership muscle do I need to exercise in order to be able to respond to the situation that you're talking about? So if you can just move to the next slide, Peter. And my sort of offering to you this afternoon is that actually it's the challenge is balancing the polarity. You know, that we know there are short-term operation demands, they're real and urgent, and we also know that there's long-term sustainability work that's equally vital, but is kind of intangible. It's in the near term, you know, and that, I guess the proposition is this isn't a problem to solve once. You know, this is a polarity that we have to accept that we're going to need to balance continuously. And what I guess the good news on this is that we are actually measuring, or there is an organization that measures the versatility of our leadership. It's called, it's from Kaiser Leadership Solutions, the Leadership Versatility Index. And what they do in their survey published by the Harvard Business Review is a sense of how versatile leaders are. And you can see from the slide, you know, over the last nearly 30 years, we are actually developing more versatility. You can see 2020, it shot right up. And that was because of the pandemic. You know, based on their survey, and I appreciate I haven't told you what's in there, but based on their survey, our versatility as leaders shot up in the pandemic. And that was because we were dealing with the polarity of not being able to go to work and still having to survive, you know, and so we're holding that polarity because we were forced to. It's come back down slightly since 2020, but, you know, it shows that as leaders, we can do this. It's just a question of our focus and attention. If you can go to the next slide, Peter, please. And so what do I mean by demonstrating versatility? And if I look at the survey, and this was published in the Harvard Business Review in 2023, you can see I've got another little 4-box matrix that they use, a bit like Martin, but you can see, you know, on the side, it's about how our focus, is it operational, is it day-to-day, or is it more strategic longer-term vision? And on the bottom, is it sort of forceful leadership, or is it more enabling leadership? And their survey measures how leaders are responding to situations. And you can see in that survey that the majority of leaders that they survey tend to be more operational and forceful in their sort of leadership style. And you can imagine, you know, not necessarily, well, maybe in IT where we're forcing through projects. You know, we've got projects we've got to deliver on. You know, it's requiring a lot of effort. You know, we need to get this done by a certain time. There's a very operational, very forceful in the way that we're approaching things. Versus in the top right-hand corner, you've got the more sort of strategic enabling. You know, this is the vision we want to achieve, you know, and enabling teams to go out and do it. And I think the biggest message in this is that actually those leaders that they surveyed that were able to balance those two those two polarities were actually quite small. And in their survey in 2023, it was 9%. And the message here is that we often default to our sort of, I guess, our innate leadership styles that we're most comfortable with, most people being sort of forceful and operational. And yet, if we're to respond to the paradoxes that we're faced with, the polarities that we're faced with, we have to balance the two. We have to hold being strategic and operational at the same time. And so what that might look like is we need to shift between roles, from taking charge and making tough decisions to enabling and supporting our teams. Strategic alignment, where we're focusing on the long-term strategy, and at the same time we're executing day to day. And we're inspiring people to adapt to new ideas, and at the same time we're also leading with resilience. Because things are ever changing, and so it takes resilience to navigate our way through this sort of thing where we're faced with constant demands on our attention. And so what does that mean in real terms? And what I'd like to do is just sort of come down, if you like, in terms of the detail. If you can move to the next slide, Peter. Just to say, if you linked, just to give you an idea, if you linked some of these things to the Inner Development Goals from the UN, the goal of being, so let's take courage, which is a subcategory in being. So leaders holding the line on sustainability, even when under pressure. So that's the paradox. I've got to deliver this project by a certain date, and at the same time, I've got to do it sustainably. How do I do it? That takes courage. The goal of thinking, which around perspective taking. IT leaders who see the immediate numbers that they're dealing with, the operational numbers, and at the same time recognize the system-wide impacts. So you're sort of zoning in and zoning out at the same time, constantly recognizing the impact of what you're doing. And then the goal of collaborating, where actually to deliver this stuff often requires partnerships with suppliers, with customers, recognizing that, even competitors, recognizing that in order to deliver long-term change, we're going to have to think about our relationships with our key stakeholders differently, and partnerships are likely to be important because we're all interconnected. So taking that down a level, what might that look like sort of on a day-to-day basis? So, for example, we need to pause and reframe. How do my decisions today align with the long-term sustainability strategy that I have? So it's kind of, what am I doing today? How does it align? Constantly pausing and reframing, checking to see whether I'm aligned with the strategy that I've set out for the organisation, if indeed you have set one out. Dual horizon thinking. So in reviews, always linking operational results with progress on long-term sustainability metrics. I'm sure many of you are already doing this, but it's a skill, and it's a leadership muscle that you have to develop because it's important to you, and aligns with your values, like I talked about in the start. And stakeholder dialogue. When we're talking about the strategy and how we're implementing the strategy, there need to be multiple voices in the room. Employees, customers, investors, community. It's tough because it requires collaboration, like I talked about at the start. But everybody's a stakeholder in this, and so those multiple voices need to be in the room. So if you move to the next slide, Peter. So my sort of answer to the question, can long-term thinking survive short-term pressures, is yes. And it's also going to require leaders to cultivate inner capabilities and versatility in the way that they hold both at once. It's not an either-or thing. And I guess my question to you is, what practice can you adopt now to stretch your leadership range in this direction? One of the things I like doing is completing the leadership circle profile, so leaders get a sense of where they're starting from. Am I being more sort of short-term thinking versus strategic? Am I balancing the two? How am I building my stakeholder relationships? You can measure that stuff in the leadership circle profile, so it gives you a baseline to start with, and then it's a question of, okay, how do I practice this on a daily basis? That's the muscle that you've got to develop. And you'll see the references on that last slide to my website, but also the websites and the research that I mentioned. So any questions?
Brilliant. Thank you, Darren. That was really good. Martin, I can't see the questions on my screen, unfortunately. Are there any come through? I've got a question for Darren as well, though. But
Nothing has come in as yet on the chat. So why don't you go ahead and ask yours, and if anyone wants to ask a question, they can, just this is a call for stick it in the chat, and we will gladly discuss it.
That's fantastic. So Darren, I'm asking this question because I'm dealing with IT leaders and generally IT leaders who have an interest in sustainability. And I was just curious of whether you had any thoughts of how those IT leaders can influence other stakeholders within a business to take a more sustainable path, because sometimes that can be quite a challenge. So just because the IT leader believes in sustainability, it doesn't necessarily mean that other people have bought into that same path.
Yes, I mean that's a great question, and the reason I say that is because I think there's two answers to it, Peter. I mean, best case scenario is that the organisation has woven sustainability into their strategy for the future, their strategy of growth. And I'll give you an example. A company that I work with in the UK is called the Gym Group, and no surprises, they run gyms. They've got like 240 gyms in the UK. But if you look at their strategy, it's about healthy people, healthy communities, and healthy planet at the biggest level. And so it goes in. So every decision they make considers healthy people, healthy communities, and a healthy planet. So it sort of weaves its way through. So that the IT leader in there, who I know, actually it's easier for him to respond to the situation because it's part of an overall strategy that the business has. I think if you're an IT leader and you're trying to influence the business, it's about you doing it yourself. So your IT strategy, but building your IT strategy with sustainability in mind. So much the same as the Gym Group, it becomes part of the strategy. And so every decision you make, it is an element that's part of that decision. And then using that as an example about how you can influence the overall organization so that they hopefully start to consider it as part of their overall business strategy. And the Gym Group are doing well. I mean, this is not about them sacrificing profit because of sustainability. I mean, I know the decisions they make about property. I mean, I noted it down actually. They have chosen 3 sustainability development goals from the UN, and they were around affordable and clean energy, responsible production and consumption, and take urgent action to combat climate change. And that is published in their business strategy. This is how we are responding to the climate threat. So it can be done, and they're really profitable and they're growing, and they're a great organization with lots and lots of customers. So I guess that's it, Peter. You have to put your money where your mouth is and start to do the work.
Fantastic, thank you. Just before we go on, there, any other questions that have come in that we need to go through, or should we just crack on?
I think crack on, Peter.
I think we should crack on, Peter.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you. So my section now. So I've only got 10 minutes. We have a relatively short slots each. So it's not going to give me enough time to help you build a physical strategy. But I'd like to be able to help you on really why you should build one and the principles around how to actually build one. Okay, so we're going to sort of explore this through what I call the dual challenge, which is actually similar to some of the terminology that Darren uses within his leadership side, and not that we've actually sort of coordinated on that. It's just it just happens to be. So the 2 challenges that really I find that most IT leaders have is about meeting immediate operational needs, and within that also managing the next crisis that comes in, because there seems to be just yet another crisis after another crisis. And then it's about also then trying to really concentrate on long-term strategic development combined with sustainability targets. And it's a really of how do you find a balance between that. And just out of interest, when I'm talking about the crisis, I always like a little bit of a positive spin on things. And this was just a quote I came across a few days ago, and it was really basically saying every crisis shows us what's broken, but it also highlights what's possible. And it was really just suggesting that IT leaders have the chance to shift from a reactive survival mode, which I think a lot of people are in at the moment, to a more sustainable and strategic approach. Okay, so today's demands are tend to be quite substantial and quite all-encompassing, and generally for a lot of IT leaders will feel like they're taking each and every day. So first of all, you need to make sure these systems are up, reliable, always available, secure, of course. You know, as the IT people in Jaguar Land Rover probably have considered a little bit more nowadays. It needs to be agile, and the system also needs to be resilient. And within resilience, I'm thinking of eliminating single points of failure, but also about crisis management within there as well. So these are today's demands, and there are. With the why of to create a strategy, these demands have basically that they have a short-term sort of concentration, so they're about here and now, but they also have some hidden costs. So your hidden costs can be things like technology creep, where you just buy more and more tech to try and resolve issues, which will then in turn often create spiraling costs of either buying new physical hardware or buying additional cloud services that you might find that you don't actually really need, and in turn that then also creates a much higher carbon footprint. So that's a flavour of why you would look at some form of long-term strategy, and so looking at long-term strategy, or you know, tomorrow's vision as a term I often use. So tomorrow's vision for most organisations will normally have each of these elements. So they'll need to make sure their systems are scalable and flexible. Of course, in most organisations, there is at least some concentration and some focus on sustainability and trying to embed sustainability, you know, potentially using energy efficiency or product life cycle, etc. Innovative, and also, again, last but not least, the tomorrow's visions should really include ready for change. So this is a term that I use now. So previously, the term used here was future-proofed. Personally, I'm not sure that you can actually future-proof. You don't know what the future holds. How can you say I'm going to be proofed against it? So I really use the term ready to change or future ready, as you might have also heard as well in various terms. And you know, that's going to be preparing for emerging technologies, AI, of course, quantum computing, green compute, or whatever else is around the corner. So those are the visions for tomorrow. So trying to get those two to connect and be part of a single going forward-looking strategy is difficult. But as what I would like to say to people is, don't choose between one or the other. Don't say, right, we're either going to look at short term or we're going to look at long term, because they both have their own issues and concerns if you do that. But it's about integrating today's requirements with tomorrow's visions. And to do that, you can go through some quite short steps. So you can go through initially assess what you currently have. You can then look to simplify your systems, then optimize, and then finally embed. So those would normally be the steps that the most organizations would go through. And some ideas of what various different organizations may do, which would be about modernizing legacy systems, which will hopefully minimize the disruptions, baking sustainability into the decision-making process, adopting hybrid type of models, so cloud and on-prem, that will allow incremental innovation, and then also building frameworks that support resilience today with adaptability for tomorrow. So really, it's not about the balancing act is not about tearing down everything that you've got at the moment and starting again. It's about trying to move from the current firefight that a lot of organizations find themselves into a foresight scenario. I'm not saying that you're going to cover yourself for every single scenario, but if you can move from just day-to-day farsight into hopefully a reasonable percentage of foresight, then that enables you to concentrate on the other acts, on the other parts in there. And part of the reason of why, why I say that sustainability is important. If you look at the UK government and if you look at their stance, so this is a little bit of an extract from the Procurement Act of 2023 about embedding sustainability. So they're basically requesting that sustainability as a fundamental component of public procurement. So encouraging contracting authorities to integrate environmental considerations at every stage. So when the UK government is saying that, when the UK government is forcing its suppliers to have an environmental consideration of what they do, that then filters through other organisations. So that gives an idea of the UK stance within there. So that's that side, and then finally, this will hopefully really just give you some of the principles about how to create a sustainable IT strategy that's going to be resilient, that's going to carry through and not just be started today and forgotten about tomorrow. So these are the main key principles. So it's going to need to protect today. It's going to have all of the immediate requirements in there. It's got to be secure, it's got to be reliable, it's got to be cost effective in most organizations. It has to be prepared for tomorrow. So it needs to be sustainable, it needs to be innovative, and very much needs to be adaptive. And then these last two are actually really important, and often these are missed out in IT strategy. So the IT strategy needs to be aligned with the business strategy, so that they're one and the same. They're both focusing on exactly the same direction. And also it needs to ensure that there's stakeholder engagement throughout the organisation, which is why I asked Aaron that question earlier about how IT leaders hopefully get other stakeholders engaged within there. So when all of these principles are applied, the strategy should and will become embedded in the operational structure. So all of this is about trying to make sure that IT is a business driver, not just simply seen as a cost center. So if it's aligned with business strategy, you have the other stakeholders engaged, and you're prepared for tomorrow, it should be seen as an enabler rather than just a cost center. And then the last thought I'd give to you on there, which is when you have a strategy, it's really important that you've got good, strong clarity about that strategy. So you really need to be able to confidently ask the question or answer the question, does every part of our IT infrastructure or our IT stack contribute to value, resilience, and sustainability? So that covers me.
Thanks, Peter. There are a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, but they're not specifically related to your piece. So I wonder whether actually I'll just drop in a question of my own on your piece first.
Yeah, perfect.
So Yeah, it's a really interesting overview. I was just thinking, listening to you there, if I was if I am a strategic thinking IT leader, what would be the first one or two things I could go out and do tomorrow that would get me started on the journey that you're advocating?
Okay, great question. So my answer to that would be before you ask that question, you need to do a couple of things first. So when we're talking about when I was talking about the steps of what you need to go through on a sustainability strategy, so it's assess, simplify, optimize, and embed. I would suggest to that IT leader that you should go through assess first. And once you've assessed your current scenario, and then you've done at least some of simplify, you'll probably actually find the question will answer itself, because you've assessed what you've got. During the assessment stage, you'll often cover what are the big issues and what are the smaller issues. You'll then simplify, and you might find some of the bigger issues are simplified and actually are no longer big issues, and therefore you'll probably be able to answer that question relatively easy that stage. I can't promise, doesn't always work, but generally it should do. It'd be unlikely that it doesn't work, but I never like to promise something I can't absolutely promise. But going through those first couple of stages, or at least all of the assess stage and at least some of the simplify stage, you should get to a scenario where it's actually quite easy to find that clarity of where do I start? What do I do next? What do I concentrate on now? And often it might be the relatively easy to get but reasonably big wins, because they then create a stronger degree of interest within the organization, and the organization goes, wow, look what IT did. So it's not about trying to brag as IT that how fantastic we are, but it's often about just proving to the business that actually taking this path to sustainability can actually bear some really good fruit.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So I'm just going to fly through some of the next slides briefly, and then I'm just conscious we've got just over 10 minutes left, so we'll just jump into straight questions and answers. So I don't want to take too much time away from that. So just within here, there's this is just giving some ideas of some of the governments and worldwide bodies that you might want to look into if it's your thoughts to research a little bit more, and then going down the more IT specific. This is a number of the IT specifics in there. We've got BCS in there as well, of course, and part of the green group within that side. And then there's also a number of professional standards that you can go through. Again, I won't go through each of these individually, but this is just a flavour of some of the professional standards. Okay, and then the next webinar in the series, just before we finally jump into questions and answers. So the next webinar in the series is going to be about growth, profit and sustainability, and really exploring the links between them, and trying to look at some thoughts and examples of how they can be interconnected and benefit each other. So let's move on to question and answers. I'm just going to leave all of our contact groups there, contact details there. As I mentioned, we're a collaborative group, as the Sustainability Professionals Partnership. So feel free to reach out to any one of us. And if we feel that we're not the right contact for you to be talking to, we'll just pass you on to the relevant person. So feel free to take our details, connect with us on LinkedIn, or pop us an email, or however you want to do that. It'd be great to hear from people. But if I hand over to yourselves, Darren, Martin, I don't know whether you want to fly through any of the questions that come through.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of questions. So Boudica has asked two questions, which I'll try and read out. So one question, so I don't know if these are strictly sustainability focused and whether we're going to be able to give amazing answers, but we'll do our best. So Do you believe developing apps using less common but lightweight frameworks can promote sustainability? The first question. And the second question, companies are trying to win the AI race by applying AI solutions to every framework and process. Sometimes they only need simple automation instead of complex AI agents. How should company leaders understand and approach this issue? Shall I have a go at those since I talked about AI?
Yeah, I think they're in your bag there.
So to the first one, do we believe in developing apps using less common but lightweight frameworks that might promote sustainability? I think cautiously yes. So things like there are applications out there that are actively working on making themselves more efficient. So they use less CPU time, which uses less energy. So I'd say using frameworks to develop apps that promote that is not a bad idea. But if they're niche frameworks, then that comes with the risk of them being perhaps a bit, obviously inherently less mainstream, and then maybe more vulnerable to security attacks, less maintained, etc. So you have to carefully trade that off. But I would certainly consider them. And then when it comes to companies doing automation instead of doing complicated AI, I think sometimes people think AI is the answer to everything, and it really isn't. And where I've seen AI work really well is in places where you've got large amounts of data or large amounts of someone turning the same handle day in, day out, and it's requiring a sort of factory approach to something that is a little bit harder to do than you can do with just pure automation on its own. Those places I've seen AI work quite well. As an example, anywhere where you've got rules, imagine coding an automation that would decide what to do based on let's say I don't know, so, categorizing employees into certain groups based on their performance. It's very easy to to say, well, if they performed, if they scored 5 out of 5, then put them in this category. If they scored 4 out of 5, that category. But what if you have a narrative view of how the employee performed? Something like AI can really help to just say, based on probabilistically, they should be sorted into these groups, and it works really effectively and really gives good results. So I'd say where you've got non-deterministic answers, AI can work really well. So at the risk of monologuing slightly, I'm just going to say that we've got a question. So David would like to ask a question, and we just need to. I think I can unmute. So shall I do that? Shall I just unmute David and ask him to ask his question?
David also there was a question earlier from David about the use of AI.
Can I just jump in on that one? Thanks, Margaret. I mean, I was just trying to think. I saw some research recently, and I can't remember where I saw it, but it was research based on all of the AI tools out there, and that it illustrated that over 40s tend to be using ChatGPT, and under 40s there's using a whole range of AI applications. And I can only speak for myself really, and people I know, where in many ways ChatGPT is it's almost like tapping into the mastermind. So if you're creating a presentation or a course, or thinking about even thinking about stuff to go on a website, you might have some ideas and then stick it into ChatGPT, and over time it certainly understands my style, and so it'll come back with some ideas. So if I'm creating a course, I'll say, this is what I'm looking to achieve, these are some of the models I'm thinking about, what else would you consider, and it'll come back with a whole load of kind of some podcasts, some videos, some literature that I hadn't even thought about. It's not even in my mind, and so for me, that's how I'm using it. It's access. It's like having access to a mastermind that I can then decide how I use. So I don't use it sort of I don't use exactly what it brings back, but I use it as to inform me on how I want to create whatever I'm creating. So that's how I use it. How about you, Martin, Peter?
Oh, I mean, it's very easy to get sucked into just using it for absolutely anything and everything, and that's where I think that's a caution I was advocating earlier on, and making sure that you're actually not just wasting AI energy, because it's very easy to set it off doing something that's trivial and pointless, that's causing a lot of CO2 to be generated. But I use it for much like Darren, for just adding ideas. I usually try and have ideas of my own first, and then ask ChatGPT, have you got some other ideas, or Copilot, have you got some other ideas for this? I use it for planning a trip. I use it for planning a meeting. I use it for structuring conversations. If I've got a tricky conversation coming up, it's quite handy to just brainstorm. How should I handle this? It's just, the list is endless. So I find it invaluable.
Yeah, and I use it similarly to yourself, Martin. So I'll often use AI. For example, if I don't know, if I need to create a presentation, I might ask it to give me a framework, just so at least I've got a start, because often the start is actually really difficult to do. Or alternatively, if I've made a start of something, I might ask AI to help me sort of just add a little bit more information and detail around that. I think it's personally, I think it's not good to ask AI to do everything that you're asking it to do. So if you ask it to do a LinkedIn post and just use an AI LinkedIn post, personally, I think it just looks like and sounds like an AI LinkedIn post. But I don't think there's any harm in asking AI to either polish up something that you've done, or alternatively at least make a start for you that you then put your own narrative around. And for that, it's useful.
Yeah.
David wants to come back, possibly to unmute himself. Do you think?
Why not? If David, if you'd like to, we can.
Hello. Yeah, I wish my students were as restrained as you are in your uses, but I mean that's a separate rant, I guess. That final presentation was really interesting, because I think there is a tendency for people to not be distinct between their strategy and their tactics. And in reality, crises should hit your tactics, but should very rarely hit your strategy, in my opinion. So your strategy should say, this is our direction of travel. It should have some policies in place, and then there's probably some projects to support that, some programs or whatever. But crises should change perhaps some of those policies and perhaps impact some of those programs for delivery. But I don't think they should be frequently impacting the strategy itself, unless there is such a fundamental shift. I mean, like COVID probably changed people's actual strategies, although in reality, a lot of companies' actual strategy didn't change. It was still increase revenues, decrease costs, that sort of thing. I'm being very flippant there, but I genuinely think there's been a spate of people talking about like fast strategy and emergent strategy, to the point that I think we should start talking about the importance of slow, sustainable strategy in the same way we talk about slow food and the slow food movement. So my question was really, is the problem that strategy isn't sustainable, or that people's strategies aren't really strategies, they're actually contextual tactics?
It's a great question.
And you might not be able to answer it in the 0 minutes we have left, but
I think it's a great
33 seconds, we're fine.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great provocative sort of question there. That's a really interesting one. I don't want to answer it in a flippant way, because I think it's more complex than that.
I think we could do a whole webinar on it, maybe, David.
Yeah.
I think I'd probably, off the top of my head, I would say there's a bit of both. So some people don't really have a strategy, and other people are focusing their strategy on the wrong things.
Yes. And did they have is there a continuous sort of learning loop that is overt? So that where the crises are happening, are they actually learning from them, and then using that learning to influence the direction of travel that they're on, or does it just get left? No reflection, move on, and no reflection, move on, and they don't actually learn from it. So from my perspective, it would be how is the organisation reflecting on those crises and how is it influencing the direction of travel for the organisation over the long term. But I do think, you know, having slow strategy is quite it's quite an interesting way to describe it, you know, and could influence the behaviours around how it's treated in the organisation. So I don't know if that's an answer, but it's my view anyway.
And from my perspective, I've come across quite a few organisations within their IT who say they've got a strategy, but it's not really thought through. It's more just a bit of a fag packet with a few ideas on it, and therefore when the next crisis comes through, they just have to react to it, and then they just go back to short term and react to it, and then come back and go, actually, well, let's change our strategy. So yes, and I mean, I'm a great advocate of that it's that you should, well, as you said, David, you know, you really should have a good long-term strategy, and it should be able to accommodate at least a good percentage of the crises that come through. I don't think, you know, the term I used was future ready. I don't think you can ever be future proofed. I don't think you can cover for everything. But if you can cover for the majority, then at least it means that you can hopefully keep on board with the strategy. But yeah, I'm just conscious of time, guys. It's 17 minutes past. We don't normally overrun at all. So, Margaret, I don't know whether there's anything that you want to add in just to conclude.
I think it's been a fantastic, interesting session, though I must admit that I got very depressed with Martin's, particularly when you quoted those views that were being publicised, particularly from the States. Very depressing.
Slightly, it is depressing, but China has made some great announcements in the last couple of days around their climate targets, and so, you know, perhaps we'll see leadership coming from a different part of the world in future.
Actually, that's an interesting view, isn't it? I think that's almost going to be another talk in itself.
But we'll keep them coming.
Absolutely. But I mean, I think this is a lot of people obviously will listen to people like that, as you're saying, from the States, and think, well, you know, we don't worry about this, and then suddenly we've all got problems. But it's been an amazing session. And I just mentioned this is actually the third of a series. Now, the other two, as this one, have been recorded, so that you'll actually find the recordings on the BCS website and the BCS YouTube section. And the recording from today will probably be about 3 weeks before it's up. But the slides are going to be sent to me, and they should be up within about a week. And as we said, the fourth one is coming. At the moment, it's been planned for February. So keep watching this space.